Hi everybody, my name is Joel Bailey. I am Director of Service Design at LiveWork. I don't know if any of you know LiveWork. We are a service design agency and have been a service design agency for about 16 years. It was our 16th birthday yesterday, so we're sweet 16 for a few days. The hangover is just about over. I've also been a service designer for about 16 years, and over that period have worked client side. I worked in a big FTSE 100 as Director of Service Design, trying to make a company do service design, which is quite an experience. I've worked as a consultant to companies in the public and private sector who are trying to do service design, much in the way we've just been hearing. And now I've jumped into agency world where I continue to do the same thing. I think what we've seen as service designers over the last 16 years, and very nicely introduced what service design is and how we work, what we've started to see is increasingly we have clients who want us to change their organization, not just design the target service and the target experience across channels, which is what they've wanted for a number of years, but actually then to make that a reality, to get away from wall art. We have lots of clients who have lots of nice things on their walls that talk about the future and show what the customer journey is going to look like in X years' time. They never realize it. And so what we are very focused on doing with a number of clients is actually getting it off the wall and into reality. And I wanted to talk about two clients today that we're working with. I can't talk about them by name, but I'm going to try and get away with it. And I think there are two different routes to doing service design, and there are a number of routes to doing service design, and we're sort of starting to see patterns coming through. And I wanted to share that with you today. So we all know these things, right? These are the double diamond. People come to service design, and they kind of, and if you Google service design, you probably, as an image, you probably came up with some of these, right? The problem with this is, and these are very useful, and they got us through our first 10 years, I'd say, because it's all about the creative approach to considering a service and how it's used and how customers work through them. And they're very useful, and I encourage you to look up about them. The problem is that they cease to become useful quite quickly because they're very isolated, they're very inward, they're very about the design process, and there's nothing there that really helps you articulate and translate all of the good stuff out of the double diamond into this other organization. And the real problem with that is that the key principle for me about service design is that, as we were hearing, people are the raw material of service design. So the service designer's job is very rarely to sit at a computer and create a screen or create boxes and wires and arrows. We just don't do that. We sometimes do it when we're prototyping, but the majority of the time we're standing up in rooms like this, not quite like this with bright lights on us and wires, but we are working with people who deliver services in large organizations. So they might be running the website, they might be running the call center, they might be frontline staff in the call center, they might be branch people, store people, what have you. These are the people who run the service, they own the service. Our job is to work with them to get them to reimagine what their service could be and think very differently. So they're our raw material. So we're kind of constantly out on the front line, and that's where we like to work. It's a very different way of working to how a lot of designers do it, I find. And the second thing for us is that the object of service design is the organization. Okay, so we increasingly are looking at organizational design, as some people call it. We have hybrid skills in our organization increasingly. I'm a bit like that. I'm not a trained designer, so I'm a bit of a mongrel, an interloper. But we like hybrids, we like mongrels, we like people who have backgrounds in technology, in change management, in all sorts of different aspects that help us to go into an organization and make change happen. And what we're doing is we're fusing these things together and taking these principles and going to our client organizations and helping them to choose the right way to apply service design. So I just wanted to use an analogy. How many people ski here? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, so when you go skiing and you're at the top of that ski run and you look down, what is it that you do? What is it that you're doing in your head just before you push off and go down that hill? I haven't skied for a long time, but what was that? You smile because it's beautiful and there's fresh air and it's wonderful. But generally what you're doing is you're choosing a line, right? You look down the mountain and you kind of and the better you are at skiing, the quicker you do it. You look down, you look, there's a hill there, there's some kids over there, there's a snowboarder there. You know, these are all the hazards of the route. And increasingly as service designers, this is what we're having to do at the beginning of our engagements with our clients, is to work out what sort of organization is this and how can we apply what we do to this organization. And we've been doing this now, or I've been doing this for a number of years, and in LiveWork, I've been in LiveWork for a couple of years now. We're getting quite adept at it, and we're starting to see patterns emerging. And I just wanted to share a few of the patterns. So these are a few of the ones that we're kind of seeing. They're really good names. We're going to have to come up with more professional names, I think, than these. But I'm just going to talk through a few of them. So, and this slightly goes against what you're saying, but there's, we can discuss this later. But I think there are ways of coming in at different levels. Okay, the scattergun is the top one. We have a big client in the Nordics because we have an Oslo studio who are a big insurance client. We've worked with them for about 6 years, and they have this scattergun approach, right? They had this. The CEO said, "I want to have extreme customer orientation." That was his phrase, right? Came in and said, and I'm just going to distribute these new tools around service design to the organization, and thousands of flowers will bloom, right? That was his approach. And they did about 100 initiatives, and we were one of the two agencies, consultancies involved. And it worked, but it was like a scattergun approach. And I don't know if that would work in the UK. It worked well in Norway. Maybe it's something about being Norwegian, I don't know. But that worked for them, and that approach is successful. The second one, the thin end of the wedge, is quite a common one. And this is very common in organizations that have no idea what service design is. And you've got some maverick guy. I was a bit like this. And you're kind of like, I think we should do some of this. And maybe it's to your question earlier, where you find a small opportunity to do some service design, and it's kind of maverick, guerrilla warfare, if you like. You just find an opportunity, and it's the thin end of the wedge, and you use that opportunity to get some sponsorship to do the next thing, and you gradually build it out. And lots of organizations find that very successful, is a way of persuading people of the merit of service design and how it can be valuable. A massive leap to this next one, which is becoming very popular, this massive agile co-location. So I worked for a large bank that's based like a couple of miles over there a couple of years ago, on this big redesign of mortgages, and it was 50 people, so similar sort of group to this, maybe a bit smaller, but it was for 8 weeks working in a room, and they were from like the branches, they were from the website, from web chat, they were from IT, and they were all tasked with redesigning mortgages end to end. And it was pretty horrendous, if I'm honest with you. I lost a number of years of my life in that 8 weeks, because it was hard work. And it's a very intense way of working, but I think it just goes to show the level of commitment people are putting into this level of redesign. Like, take a whole area like mortgages, put a bunch of people in the room at a lot of expense, and get them to reinvent it. And I think it says a lot about the state of play at some of our banks, that they're a bit terrified, essentially, and they're willing to do that sort of thing. So that's another one. I'm not going to spend too much time on those two. I want to spend more time on these bottom two, because we've had 2 clients who have said, we want to do service design, and we have worked with them to say, well, actually, you want it in a certain way, and you want it in a different way. And they've been running in parallel, so I'm going to talk about them. The first one is this just prototype it thing, which has been fascinating. And the second one was this one blueprint to rule them all, which a blueprint you might be familiar with is a service design tool that I'll talk about. But let me go on to the first one, okay? So, this is a luxury client. This is our first luxury client. And luxury, you'd have thought, run brilliant services, but not quite the case. Anyway, they came to us, and this wasn't top-down. This was someone in the middle who was a bit of a maverick, who read our book, actually. We've written a couple of books as business. And he read it, and he called us up out of the blue, and he said, I really want to do this. I don't really have a mandate. I don't really have much money, but I just think it's worth doing. And we were like, yeah, OK, this sounds like fun. And if you went with the double diamond, it wouldn't have worked, right? You just can't go in with that purist approach. So we had no sponsorship. They wouldn't let us speak to any customers. Couldn't do any customer research because we couldn't get past their insight people because they weren't bought in. But what he did have was access to some store managers in various parts of, there was one in Milan, one in Florence, and one in Japan. And he kind of brought this motley selection of people together and said, we're just going to go and experiment. And so we went straight to prototyping, which for our team members was quite tough, because they like to start with like an immersive ethnographic research period. We didn't do any of that. We weren't allowed. So we just went out. The guys got dressed up into like proper store wear and went and shadowed these guys and just worked with the front line. And if you can't get to the customers, you may as well go and work with the front line, because they work with the customers. So we worked in stores, we understood how things worked. We went backstage, as we would call it, and we saw how products were returned and fixed and how all the processing happened or didn't happen. So it was kind of ethnographic research, but not with customers. It was just deep into the service. And it was multi-channel, so we went to different channels and hung out with them a little bit. Very below the radar, because if we got too high above the radar, that we would have got shot down. So it's kind of guerrilla work. I can't give too much away, so I've had to choose pictures that don't tell you too much about the client. But we then got these, so we did all the research work, then we got these guys to a central location and we just got them to prototype. We got them to just sketch stuff, and we have all these things that you'll be familiar with. But they weren't just screen things, we had them role-playing things, we had them doing different call interactions, just playing around with different channels and seeing what would work better. And out of that, we created about 20 different candidate prototypes that would all fix different parts of the customer's return journey. It was returning one of the products, these luxury products that cost thousands of euros. Once you return it, God help you, you know, the service you got from this organization was terrible, which is why I can't tell you who they are. Although some of you might be able to work it out if you're luxury buyers. I don't know how many luxury buyers you've got in the audience. But we did these 20 prototypes, and we got them out into store, and there's two of their team prototyping. And the things they're holding are the things that we created. So we literally handmade about 250 of these product passports as one of the prototypes. It's a piece of paper that when someone buys a product, you give it to them. It tells them all about how to return a product and the channels that they can engage with in order to return it, and what will happen if they need to return it. And we created a ceremony around the returns experience, because when you buy a really nice luxury product, they bag it in like 5 bags and put bows on it, and they give it to you with a latte, and they say goodbye. But when you get the returned fixed bag, it comes in a plastic bag, and it's really, and then they just kick you out the back door sort of thing. So we kind of recreated all of this, but none of it was really formalized. But this is my most favorite slide of the lot, which you can't really see, but I was running a workshop then with these guys to start thinking about how do we roll this out across the organization. So we had a couple of tables, so not a huge team here, so we're working in a small scale way. But this guy on the right is the president of the organization who had heard about the work we were doing. There's something very contagious and infectious about prototyping. People hear about it and they're like, oh, this is exciting. The president came in and he said, I love what you're doing here. I love it, and we want to do more of this, which was great because I was hosting this session. So it's like, it turned the corner of the whole session. He came in, they were all like overjoyed with it. And the point for me here is that you can come in at a middle level and you can kind of like do guerrilla warfare and find your way to the CEO. And we've now got a 1-year program to do a full level top-down transformation with this organization to take them forward, a big change, and looking at the sales journey, which they would never have let us look at last year. So just an example about how just prototype it, don't bother with ethnographic research, just get out to the front line and do something, can be a really effective way of working. So that's my first example. Second example, so this is a very different company. This is a utilities firm in the UK. And they are a very different animal to that prior one. The prior one, you know, in the fashion luxury business, they like making things. It's not really a big surprise that they were going to like prototyping. This is like in their DNA to like that. This organization, very different. And when we arrived, we did this kind of what we called like a customer journey amnesty, okay? So each one of these is a different team's version of a customer journey, and we got them all along, and this was a bit more of a top-down exercise, so people were encouraged to come to the sessions that we were running with their customer journeys, and then we kind of brutally sort of pulled them apart and found out what people were trying to do. But there was a sense that this was an engineering organization historically. That was their heritage. So they loved service design. They really got hold of it even before we arrived, because they just like the nature of upstream and downstream and front stage and backstage, which are big aspects of service design. And they really got it, but they knew enough to be dangerous, okay? So they were just wildly creating stuff. And our client there, who had a mandate, was like, we've just got to organize these people. We love the energy, we've just got to organize them. We've got to get a clear structure. We've got to get a clear set of terms and definitions so that everybody's joined up and going the right way. Otherwise, you end up with lots of people trying to do the right thing by the customer, but it all doesn't hang together. So slightly different on this one. So we then were able to host lots of very well-structured mapping exercises where we were mapping the top-end as-is journey. We weren't even looking at the to-be journey, the future journey. What is it now? How does it all hang together? It was a very engineering, these people weren't all engineers, but they were an organization that had that in their DNA. And we did customer research alongside, but what was more interesting was how the organization was engaging with the work. And we had these like really detailed blueprints on walls in their offices, and people just kept coming in and scrubbing things out, writing new things in. They became like this living tool, and people started then dropping into the rooms and saying, yeah, I've just spoken to someone, the thing that we put there that's red is actually green, and they became like a living document. And whereas the other client was all about prototyping and just get your sleeves rolled up and get stuff out the door, this was a real analytical job of like, how does our organization connect to deliver a joined up customer experience? Or in fact, the question was, how does it not connect to not deliver that experience? It was starting from the negative. But they were really, really engaged with it. And so we worked with them to create this enormous blueprint, which still lives in the organization. I'll talk a bit more about how. But the blueprints generally connect to the customer experience that you want the customer to have end to end over a series of journeys. So it could be a life cycle from beginning to end, before, begin, during, and after. And then you've got journeys within there. And we'll break it all out. And it was very detailed. This thing is kind of huge and very dense. And then you connect it with the business. So, what does the business get from each touch point? What's the benefit that the business is getting from a financial point of view? Is it revenue? Is it costs? What are we doing there? And organizationally, how do all our capabilities join up to deliver that touch point? So it's a pretty simple model, but it got really dense. And I'm only showing you one part here because I can't show you too much. But they just started packing it full of stuff. And all the green and red and amber is like status points about where we are with certain things that we're trying to deliver to achieve an improvement in that area. And they got to the point where they could just about print it on an A0 piece of paper and it would be legible. But they now have a plotter in their office, right? And this is like not an organization that has big design printers in their offices. But they have one now because they have to constantly reprint it and people are constantly marking it up. And they now have it that most of the boxes have assigned owners on them. So people own the boxes, they have accountability. And when you've got organizations who are very vertically organized, and most of our organizations are siloed in lots of ways, what they have managed to achieve is a horizontal orientation of their teams. So I might be responsible for a certain silo of the organization, but I'm responsible for a box on the customer journey that is about delivering a customer's experience. So you get this really nice mixture of responsibilities. And as a result of that, it's become a living document, as I was saying. They're kind of constantly reprinting it. It lives in the organization. It's constantly referred to in the organization. And that's a product of service design, but you can see that compared to the other organization, it's a very different state of affairs. I imagine that luxury client will get to this sort of stage later. And I imagine these guys will get to prototyping at some point. I hope they will. But they're very different in their DNA, and therefore they require something different. So I'm running out of time. So my conclusions really are, there are three things that I've learned from these two projects, amongst others. The first one is this find a chess player. And what I mean by that is, we're an agency. I used to be a client. I'm now an agency now. The value of having someone on the client side who knows how to navigate an organization is so important. And for both of them, Simone for the first one and Angela for the second one, they always were like 4 steps ahead of like, how do we navigate this organization to make this work? Because at the end of the day, if people are the basic raw material of service design, you need to know how to diplomatically navigate people. And as designers, we're not often the best. We get impatient, right? We just want to make progress and make the beautiful thing a reality. These guys make sure we don't get into trouble. So make sure you find yourself a good chess player who can help you. This thing about working to heritage, so clients have a DNA, not as well, they do as individuals, obviously, otherwise they'd fall over and die. But as organizations, they have a DNA. So the first one, it was no surprise, actually, in the end, retrospectively, that they wanted to just prototype. They're used to creating stuff. They're used to sketching things, designs. So they came to it very naturally. With a utilities company, it's kind of to be expected that they'd want to do an enormous blueprint that had upstream. So we had these lovely moments where they were like, so when we get to renewing a customer, a lot of the reasons why customers don't renew is because upstream they were sold something that wasn't right for them. These are major moments of awakening for a big organization. So what we need to do is fix the sales process in order to fix the renewals process. That seems obvious, I guess, as a customer. If you sell me the wrong thing, I'm not going to renew it. But to an organization that's vast and has massively siloed, they don't get it. So that engineering company very quickly got the upstream, downstream thing. They got the front stage, backstage thing. So we have to find ways to tailor what we do to the heritage of the organization we're working with. And then the third one is earn attention. And not go in saying, we've got the answer. The double diamond was often used as like a silver bullet. I'm going to come in, we're just going to tell you all your problems, we're going to fix your world. We're very humble these days in the way we approach our design challenges and go in and work in a kind of humble way to earn attention, find problems to fix. To your point earlier, whoever asked the question, I would go out and ask what problems have people got to solve, and then how can you apply service design to solve their problem. That's what we generally try and do on a lot of our projects and help our clients to, because you win alliances and then the organization generally buys into service design that way. Because, just to reiterate, for us, it always comes back to these things, and what I think sets service design apart is that people is what, we do prototype screens, we prototype paper things, face-to-face interactions, but we just recognize that it's people at the end of the day that we're working with. And if we don't get them to believe in the new service that we think they should deliver, then it's not going to happen, okay? And then the object, as I think I've stressed enough, is definitely the organization, and that's what we spend all our time navigating these days and getting very heavily involved with. So that's me. You can meet me here at Joel Bailey UK, and we've written a couple of books if you want to read any more. Otherwise, grab me for a drink afterwards. But I think we've got some questions, right?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Well, let's see.
Great, thank you. So, yes, any questions for Joel?
How do you find a chess player?
How do you find one?
How do you find? I mean, what's your strategy when you approach a company? How do you find the right person as a chess player?
Ideally, they come to you because they're the ones who commission you to do the work. Because they're the ones who are savvy enough to think this is something we need to do. If you're internal, okay. So I had this challenge. It took me about, 9 months to find my chess player, because I'm not a chess player, right? We have the cricket analogy that I play very straight bat. I don't overcomplicate things. So I found someone who was familiar with the organization, did know how to move around. And I have clients who are asking me the same question. There is no silver bullet to do it, but you're looking for a certain profile of person. We often describe them as like Gandalfs. Gandalf and Lord of the Rings, kind of wise, pipe smoking. They can survey the land and say, yeah, him over there and her over there. You want to avoid them. So they kind of know the land. But they have to implicitly get the value of service design and trust you. So there's kind of a balancing act. And I was lucky enough to find one when I worked in a big corporate. It's very valuable. It's not straightforward, but you do have to find one.
Is this person sitting in top-level management, or it can be at any level?
At any level. As long as they are upwardly mobile. Because they have aspirations. The person who I work with, when I was in the big company of Capita, he saw service design as a ticket to a better future, right? And he was an engineer by trade, but he saw it, he saw the value of it. He's like, we need to do more of this. And so I'm not saying he was like Machiavellian and like, I'm just going to ride you and just go all the way with it. But he did see the value of it, and we had a mutually beneficial relationship. I needed him, he needed me, so it worked.
One question about, do you have any tips for companies that they think they're doing the double diamond, they learn the prototyping stuff, but what I have experienced is that they live in the second diamond. They never actually go to first diamond. And actually, I call it design with no target, because you really don't know where you're going and why.
Yeah. So people who don't invest in the first diamond. Yeah, and this happened on the big co-located mega agile thing that I was describing earlier, that everyone kind of bolted too fast. I remember we did a 1-week run through of the whole design process that we were going to then go through in the next 7 weeks. And the ideas that came out of them were not very good necessarily, but everyone got very overexcited about them and then just bolted and said, let's just start creating these are great. And we lacked a decent discovery stage. You have to invest. And people get very excited about Agile, like just go straight into Agile, build it, it's going to be great. And you end up with screens, nothing wrong with screens, but as soon as you put a screen in front of a customer, they're only going to talk about that screen. And that screen may be the wrong thing. And as service designers, we want to create the right thing right, not the wrong thing right. and you can do a beautiful screen, but if it's not the right feature and function for the customer at that point in their journey, then it's not going to work. So we have come into contact with that, and it's quite hard to make a case for doing depth research. So we often start with, the client has a whole load of data, a whole load of insight. You just kind of have to take it off the shelf and unpack it and sweat the value out of it, and then do some gap research work to fill whatever gaps you find. So it's quite you can do a lean way of doing that early diamond and get over the fact that it can be perceived to cost a lot of money. But I would say if you don't do the first diamond properly, you end up with lots of lost cost later on down the road because you'll build the wrong thing.
In your experience, do you think prototyping a service deserves a different approach to prototyping a product?
I'm not sure. I think what we generally do is try and connect products in our service work. I'm not sure that requires a different process, though. I've not really thought of it. What do you think?
I guess it would be more difficult to prototype some types of services using the tools that perhaps are available for more traditional kind of UX work.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious to know if you've discovered any other tools which are particularly useful for prototyping services.
Cardboard. No, seriously, we've got. I had a picture that I took out because I wanted to cut it down, but it's a picture of one of our guys with this big bit of cardboard, and he's walking down the street in Oslo, and it's a fake kiosk for buying tickets in the station. So we were doing work for the Norwegian Rail Authority, and so we just put it up and we put an iPad in it and we faked it up. But we wanted to test the whole engagement, especially with elderly people of buying tickets and their challenges with, and they're all doing this, and everyone was bending down lots. You're like, well, maybe we should bring the screen up a bit, So we do work a lot with cardboard. We do work a lot with role play. I think, most people assume that prototyping these days is screen-based. We do a lot of screen-based because, as you say, digital transformation is the thing right now. But we try not to leave the other channels behind. Call centers, for instance, we work a lot with them about how do you have the right conversation with the customer. And in store, it's similarly, what's your body language with the customer? How does that work? So, yeah, there are different ways of doing it. I don't think we've necessarily invented a process for it, though.
Is there a danger that the service blueprint becomes a kind of unmanageable monster for the organisation?
Yeah, definitely.
And does that kind of director imagine a kind of live stream of data funneling into this?
It's interesting. And people are starting to ask us, is there software that we can run a blueprint on? So it's like a live blueprint, and no is the answer. There is some software for doing customer journeys. It's a bit limited, but we have had clients say that their vision for the future of working is that people are in a room working on a journey collaboratively as a multidisciplinary team with a kind of live dashboard of how that journey is performing, and they know what the problems are, and then they go in and explore them and fix them. I don't know. People want to go down that road. There are other people who, for these guys, the blueprint became a big beast, but they assigned ownership of sections of it. So people only really worried about certain parts of it. I don't think there's anybody who's collectively worried about the whole thing. And they have customer journey managers, and they have a whole architecture around this. And a lot of the big commodified service providers, utilities, telcos, that's the way they're going. They're trying to sort of orientate themselves around the customer, put ownership around different parts, different boxes literally on the blueprint. And it kind of works for them. I hope that they get beyond that and start actually delivering new services as a result, as opposed to just using it to organize themselves. But yeah, you're right. It's a tendency that you can kind of becomes monolithic, right? And you don't want that.
Business transformation is usually quite a long-term process. So I was just wondering, how do you measure success, especially agency side? Where you kind of just pop in.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. We, weirdly though, a couple of months ago had 3 services launch in the same month that we had done in the previous 3 years. So, you can create an ad in an ad agency like this lovely one that we're in now, and it will be out there very quickly and you'll get the data very quickly back. We just don't get that because, you're right, the delivery time lag is very long. from prototype even to full rollout can be quite a long process, and then you have to wait for the numbers out of it. And even then, there's all the death by 1,000 cuts of the prototypes as they go into reality. So it's a very challenging one, and we try not to get too lost in it. But we do like to see our services ship. You know, we did a lot of work for Kone to give them a new, so they're a lift manufacturer. They have recently relaunched their entire servicing offer, which was designed by us, and it's almost the same thing we designed, you know, like 3 years later. So it happens. They've already told us that it's 50% increase in their sales of service offers. So, you know, we get those, and whenever I hear 50%, I'm like, can I have the actual number, please? Because it just sounds too crude to be true. But we do get the numbers. We just have to be patient, and we have to hope the client's going to deliver on the integrity of the work that came through. But yeah, it is a challenge, but c'est la vie.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool, thanks.